All right, I'm Rick Owens. I am the Assistant Vice President of Administrative Services at Pitt Community College. They asked me to come and talk in a little bit about PCI policy and management. I've done this session, I don't know, probably a half dozen times over the past 3 years. I will start out and say that I won't say a lot, some of this is idealistic. I am not here 100%. Some of this is do as I say, not as I do. So, hey, this is my, ideal world, and where I hope to get. One of the things I'm going to lead off on is that compliance of any type is a dissatisfier. You're not going to make anybody happy in your organization by being PCI compliant. All you're going to do is you're going to make them upset. Why can't I do X? Why can't I be the admin of my local machine anymore? Why can't I run credit cards? We were talking a little bit earlier. Why can't I run credit cards over the wireless? Why can't I do? Your answer is always, or most times, going to be no. You want to try to present that in a positive light, but it's really not going to make anybody happy. In the moment you're not credit card, you're PCI compliant, and you can't accept credit cards, your business office is going to be pretty upset. So, who should be responsible for it? My opinion is that PCI compliance is not an IT function. In our organization, the ultimate responsibility, the person that signs off on it, is our CFO. We were talking a little bit earlier, I am not in my CFO's chain of command. The CFO and my boss both report to our president. It's worked out well for me. He actually is the chair of our PCI group. I'm a non-voting member, so they have the authority. I advise. That's it. I have tried to move to that structure for a majority of my governance. I do chair a fair number of my committees, but the business office is the one that wants to accept credit cards. The business office is who has to find the money to pay the fines, to pay the consultants, to pay for everything else. And technology is only part of the solution. The question, and it's one that I've started batting around with people, is should you have your own internal PCI council? As to, I don't care. I'm going to run it by the people and say, this is your business function. I can make this work. This is what your cost is going to be. All things are possible given time, money, and the laws of physics. If they want to throw enough money at something, we can figure out how to be PCI compliant over wireless. Square does it all day long. Do they want to invest the money into that process? If they have this new, brilliant idea of what they want to accomplish, here's what it's going to run. Go for it. I need another body. I need to buy this hardware. You need to buy this. The explanation for shared ownership, and I run this by our business office on a regular basis, and I remind them of it. I don't have anything to do. Our facility services folks handle the analog lines on campus. I don't do anything with that. If we go back to the good old days where they're running the swipe card over a telephone line, that's completely out of IT's hands, but the business office still has to be PCI compliant. There's nothing in there that says, hey, if you're running this, you get to be excluded from a bunch of the other sections that are in there. You remove the IT function, but you've still got to handle the personnel issues. You've still got to have a training program. You've still got to train your employees. You've still got to have data destruction policies. And there's personnel as well. Our HR folks are involved in this. We do some of this stuff in our onboarding process for our bookstore, for our business office people. We're actually going to have to start bringing in, and we're at a college, I'm going to have to start bringing in some of our student services folks because they're talking about possibly making people pay for copies of transcripts. The minute somebody can, in my view, the minute somebody can logically, if I can make a logical connection between them touching PCI data and their job description, we put it in the job description, it becomes part of the onboarding process. The other reason is IT really shouldn't be in the habit of enforcing policies or setting processes for other people, especially workflow. I've asked my CFO if he wants to report to me. The answer's always been no. It's like, yeah, really, this stuff would be a whole lot easier if you just let me tell you what to do. So, I don't want you telling my cashiers what time they have to be here in the morning. It's like, great, you and PCI. The areas of shared concern, the protecting cardholder data, I meet with my department heads on a regular basis. I meet with my deans, the other department heads, the areas, and my business office. Just because you can't secure data, they can't secure data if they don't know where it's coming from. The big thing, you've got to have the policies and procedures in place if you're going to write stuff down. I'm assuming I've got cities, counties, folks in here that have parks and recs departments and stuff like that. If you're allowing people to come in and register for soccer or Little League or stuff like that at the field, are your folks writing down credit card numbers? You know, if they are, who carries it? How's it secured? How's it get back? How long do you retain it? And then anybody that comes in with these policies needs to know it. And that can be alleviated. One of the things that we found out is we run a huge continuing education department. And our instructors were actually allowing people to register for the class at the site. So we don't teach concealed carry anymore, but one of the examples that I like to use is we had folks teaching concealed carry classes. People would show up the day of the class, the instructor had the little receipt booklet, they'd fill it out, they'd put the credit card number, the person's name, the expiration date right there, and then carry it back, give it to the person that was going to enter it into our ERP. That person keys it in, that gets stapled to the student's registration sheet that then gets filed on campus. The only way I found out about this is when we were going through and cleaning out our data center, the Con Ed, the secondary data center, that Con Ed had stored stuff in from 10 years ago. I had 10-year-old credit cards sitting in there. Most of them luckily had expired, but it's just there. Ask why? It was easier. So you need to be having those discussions with your folks to find out where the card data is, who's collecting it, how long, and then if they are writing it down, you can write some of this stuff down. You just have to have a destruction policy. And that's, 3.1 is keeping it at a minimum. If you don't have to write it down, can you get away with, and it's a business decision at your local institution, can you get away with running Square? Steve Gilliland, if you saw him yesterday afternoon outside, he was running an iPad. He had the little Square app, the Square app and the credit card reader right there. They swiped. That takes you completely out of it. They're responsible for it. The processing fees are a little bit higher, but it may save you some peace of mind. And it may be a trade-off that your business office is willing to make. It's a discussion that I'm having with my foundation right now, because they would be able to go out to God only knows where and run a fundraiser. And they want people to be able to make donations there on the spot, which is great. It's going to boost the amount of funds that we bring in, but at the same time, if I don't have a secure way for them to process those cards, it increases my liability. We talked about the onboarding. One of the things we discussed, and we use PCI, and one of the best descriptions I've heard of the payment card industry compliance is that's the GED of security. You've got a lot more information to worry about. You've got personally identifiable information. You've got other confidential information that's living on your network. To me, this was a lot easier to rein in than the 250,000 social security numbers at my college that were used as a student ID up until the mid-90s. When most of you guys were in college, they used to post your grades by social security number beside the class. At least they did ours. I had instructors on campus that had been there forever and a day that still had those grade sheets and filing cabinets. We've had to go through and remind them that, you know, if you really want to keep this for some unforeseen reason, here's a Sharpie, get to work, strike out the information. So we use it as a basis for our security program. And one of the things is, you know, the sending the primary account numbers by end user messaging technologies, we remind them not to do that. We do social security numbers, any type of personally identifiable information. This is all in our onboarding process. It's covered in employee manuals, it's covered in training. We do an annual thing where we remind folks, just because it's part of PCI, is you've got to have a security program for all of your employees. It doesn't say all employees that touch PCI. It's all employees have to have some type of security training. 6.1 is what we focus on as IT gurus, is the system components, and that's because it's the easiest thing for us to focus on. I can audit a machine. One of the issues that we're starting to run into though is BYOD. How are you going to handle that? How do you handle the VPN access? If you allow people to remote into your site, what do? We require, for any VPN user, we require a 90-day audit by IT. They have to bring their machine in physically, leave it with us for a day while we run through an audit. If you want the privilege to work from home, I still don't understand why so many people really want to work from home, but they do for some reason. It's in the contract that they signed. Their VPN access agreement is a contract between us and them. Day 91, if they hadn't brought their machine in, we cut it off. If they're at a conference, I get a phone call from them because they're upset, and I apologize. Say, do you remember this? They're like, yeah, but. It's like, sorry. I'll get to you by the end of the day, hopefully. So, usually they learn after the first time for some reason. Just throw that up there. Okay. They're removing disabled inactive accounts at least every 90 days. That's the reason our HR folks are on our PCI counseling. I get an email, my help desk gets an email, and my two department heads that are involved in PCI get an email as soon as we know somebody is leaving. As soon as somebody comes in and announces their retirement, we get a date, or somebody announces their resignation, we get a date, we get an email, help desk ticket goes in, so we can make sure that it's canceled. I also sign off on a form, and I've actually been doing that today. Whenever somebody leaves, I shoot a note to my two directors and say, has their access been terminated? Yes. I actually sign off on a form that goes back to HR, that gets processed. And this, our exit form, I despise the process. I attribute it to the walk of shame. They're required to go from me to our business office to their supervisor, campus police. There's about 8 signatures that they have to have on this form. It works well for us, especially in this process, because I can make sure that keys are collected, I can make sure that hardware has been collected, access rights have been terminated, all that fun stuff, before the employee gets their last paycheck. Usually they want that on that last day of the month, so I always get my signatures. And then we use it to disable their accounts. At Pitt, we do a 45-day window, and that's an internal process. The facilities control, this one's ugly. For me, I've got 2 data centers, a cashier's office, a bookstore, and a couple of other smaller locations that I have to worry about security. That's where PCI data gets transferred. For you guys that are dealing with various offices, especially if you're trying to do stuff at sport events, at Park and Recs, at all these other locations, other than drink a lot, I don't know how you do it. You've got to secure the access. You've got to have the visitor logs. In my data center, as soon as somebody walks in that is not a PCC employee, the first thing they're done is my guys hand them a clipboard. They sign in, they print their name, they print their company, they sign it. They put the time in, when they leave, they put the time out. It's just a requirement we have. It took 9 months or so for me to get all of my employees trained. Now it's second nature. As soon as somebody comes into the vendors, a lot of them are telling me they don't do that at other locations. Tell them to suck it up. They're doing it at mine. And they get accustomed to it. I've actually had my guys forget and the vendor ask for the form. So, the development of procedures to easily distinguish between who is who. How many of y'all require these? We didn't until about a month ago. We are in the process of moving to where all employees have to have a badge on them at all times, and it has to be in clear display. My guys do it. My argument was I'm well enough known on campus that I don't need one, but my president said if I have to wear my badge, you have to wear yours. So I think, yes, sir. But you've got to be able to easily distinguish between an employee and a guest being a vendor, a guest being, somebody brings a spouse in, and how do you manage that? How do you keep your visitor logs? We talked a little bit about that, but this is anywhere on campus. It's a nightmare on mine, and it's one that we're having from just a physical safety discussion as well. How do I distinguish between a student and a guest? We're looking at doing the same thing we're doing with employees as far as requiring an ID badge, but then how do you enforce it? I have on any given day 8,000 students on my campus. So, the visitor log we discussed a little bit. The testing for the presence of wireless access counts to detect unauthorized. A lot of that is easy enough to maintain with port security as far as your physical infrastructure goes. What was amusing is when we had one of the state auditors come down and wardrobe our campus, these drove them absolutely nuts, and it was fun to watch. And they wanted me to write up exceptions for it. And I started laughing at them. It's like, they can't access any of my resources. They were like, but it's on your campus. It's like, I don't care. How am I supposed to restrict 8,000 cell phones that can become a wireless access point? This has been 3 years back, and we went back and forth to the point that they almost gave me an audit exception. And I got involved with the state auditor's office, and finally they let it drop. So they are going to war drive. The biggest pain that you're going to have to deal with is an uninformed auditor. I don't know if you guys deal with the state auditor's office.
That's pretty much all of them.
Yeah, I mean it can be brutal. And then maintaining a policy that addresses information security for all personnel, and the key phrase there is all personnel. So that means that all my adjunct faculty, all my part-time employees, anybody that comes in now goes through our HR office, they get a briefing on security that says, thou shalt not send social security numbers, send credit card numbers, disclose this type of information. Us, we make them sign off on a FERPA release form, the Federal Education, Privacy Act. They run through that also. The policies and procedures for consideration. And this is where I have spent going on 6 years trying to get Pitt to the point that I'm comfortable, and I'm still not there. We just started working on job descriptions. Anybody that touches credit cards or may potentially come in contact with credit cards, I'm working on social security numbers, anything that's deemed personally identifiable information that I have to send out that notification and have to maintain credit monitoring for. We're trying to get it added to their job description. Just because then I can set a flag, I can pull a report and say, these are all the people that have to go through this training every year. And I can mandate that a little bit better. Because right now, it's by individual, and it's horrible. We're trying to go by position. We're moving in that direction, and it's just taking forever in the day. The data destruction policy, electronic as well as paper. Like I mentioned, I found stuff that's 10 years old on my campus. And people keep it just because they can. You know, they kind of like to question.
Have you gotten into the different levels of shredders to try to set any sort of policy about which type of shredder should be purchased?
Hey, we have a policy on campus that any of this stuff goes to, is maintained by our copy center. And then our copy center goes through, I don't know if they're local or if they're statewide, but it's confidential records management, and they come out with one of the DOD certified shredders and run it through that. So it's an internal, we do not, we request they do that, just because, yeah, I would prefer they not send it through one of the old ribbon shredders that can be kind of easily taped back together. I'm not that interested in the information that some people are. And then how long, and as I mentioned it, there's a couple of software packages that will maintain some information, and it's, I kind of relate it back to the public disclosure, is, you know, if you maintain it, you have to know what you're doing with it. You have to be able to produce it. You have to be able to destroy it. So know where your data is. Know how to get rid of it. Security, you know, the physical and the information security policies for all of your employees. What's an employee do? You know, it's the discussion that we've had. What do they do if the genius decides to email you their credit card information? Do you have a policy that says you don't accept that? And I usually get blank stares from the security consultants that I've asked. I was like, if I don't have a policy that states that, you know, our policy says we will not accept payment via email. The main reason for that, I don't want anybody to think that my email system is within my PCI scope. If I don't have that, is it? And I usually get a, you know, that's a really good question, I'll get back to you. Nobody's gotten back to me on that one yet. So I want it explicitly excluded from that. I can't say that it doesn't happen, because I know that I have kids and parents that will email in, hey, I need to pay Tommy's tuition by the end of the day, it's $4.58. Here's my credit card information. By the way, here's a social security number too. What I've done with my registrar and financial aid and cashier's office is ask them to notify me so we can go in on a server level and remove those messages as well.
We have an iReport box that actually rejects those messages at the firewall, and we send a return email message telling the sender that we do not accept credit card payments through email. So that way it actually never enters the network. You can get it as a service too, it's really not that expensive.
I haven't looked at it recently, so yeah.
It'll also reject social security numbers.
Yeah. So, employment procedures, I've talked about our onboarding process. That took me about 4 years and 2 HR directors to get. It's conversations. The biggest thing about this thing is building relationships with people. You know, I will now go and grab my current HR director. He and I will go to lunch about once a month, just so I can have that relationship with him, that when I need to add something to job descriptions, when I need to add something to the onboarding process, he doesn't look at me like an absolute knucklehead. He knows where I'm coming from, and he understands that I'm looking out for the benefit of the entire college, the benefit of the organization. PC replacement. But Again, it goes back to the personally identifiable information. I didn't have so much of the credit card stuff. But what's being stored on your individual user's local machines? There's a lot of the DLP, that type stuff, will go in and make sure that you're not sending information, but what are they storing? What are they saving on their local machine? And do your PC techs, how much do they come in contact with? Do your PC techs know what to do if they walk over to somebody's machine and it says, you know, hey, social security number is 4X, or they've got grade rosters that are wide open and they see all the socials, or whatever that type of information's there? My techs know to go to their supervisor, network, PC, sysadmins, all go to their manager then comes to me, and we sit down and talk with the end user and explain to them why this probably is not a good idea. Lost devices, especially as we're moving more towards BYOD, there have been at least one session so far today, and I think there's multiple on policies and security information. What do you do if a machine gets lost? How do you ensure what information was up there? We don't, in our PCI environment, I don't allow mobile devices. I don't allow laptops. It's all hardwired. If you unplug the machine, the port goes dead. I've got stuff locked down for now. I really don't know 3 years from now that I can sit here and say the exact same thing. As enrollment grows, I know they're looking at moving the bookstore to where they can do pickup in their gym. Are they going to allow them to pay? They've already started mentioning it. I'm fighting it tooth and nail. They wouldn't be able to swipe wireless. How do I deal with that? They're really not going to want me to drag wires across the gym floor and tape it down. For some reason, our athletic director complains when I do stuff like that. I'm not sure. So what are we going to do? How are you securing your information? How are you securing those mobile devices, the laptops, your CFO? If he's part of your PCI environment, ours isn't, but our CFO has a laptop. You know, if he needs to access some of this information, how do you make sure that if his laptop gets lost, if he's on his way home and he stops to fill up his car with gas and, you know, somebody throws a brick through his window and picks up a laptop? We actually had that happen to a faculty member, so the story goes. They had a busted window to show for it, so they were either creative or, I mean, they were in it to win it, either way. But, I mean, it was, you know, this is lost. So what do you do? Really, the faculty member is a bigger nightmare to me than the PCI stuff. Because with them, I've got to worry about academic integrity. You know, what tests did you have on the machine? How are we going to go in and make sure all the tests are done, the student data, all that stuff. So these are things that you need to have in place and need to start these discussions. And really, the sooner you start the discussion, the better, and a little bit at a time. If you try to force, my predecessor tried to force a lot of this stuff through all at once, and it's like trying to get somebody to drink from a fire hose. It's just not going to work all that well. Little bites. And really start small. If you're already cozy, if you've already got a good relationship with your HR folks, start with the job descriptions. Start with your onboarding process. Move into the other stuff. If you report to your CFO, hey, I really hate using scare tactics, but pull some of the historical stuff where people have had $100,000, $200,000 fines and have several thousand numbers that were leaked, and show them that they're having to pay $20 a year for credit monitoring. Those numbers add up real quick, and especially when you ask me, where's that $500,000 going to come from? Who's going to get riffed for that one? I mean, that's what it's going to boil down to. So. And this is where I open it up for questions, discussion, comments, concerns. What are you guys dealing with?
Basically, how we're for a public library. We don't take cards right now. We'd like to take cards to the desk or files and that kind of thing. If we just get a square, notepad and a square, does that pretty much just take care of, square takes care of most of this since it's in and out?
if you can get your business office to buy into it, my opinion is yeah.
Okay. Do we need to have any special considerations for the desk employees that are taking a card and swiping it?
In good practice, yes.
Okay.
Hey, just because, from a publicity standpoint, if I hand you my card and your phone's sitting under the desk
Yeah,
and you record it, who gets the bad publicity?
yeah,
It's not Square who's handling the PCI stuff.
yeah.
It's the library. I think you've got some liability there from a personnel issue, from a personnel training. You're gonna fall under a different SAQ, a different self-assessment questionnaire.
Yeah.
It's gonna be very minimal, but it's gonna deal mainly with the HR stuff.
We've been looking at doing the Square, and the business managers, she's upset at how much you have to pay, but when we look at, we're a small staff, you know, there's only one business manager, I'm the only IT, and it's just one person here and there that handles each role. And for all of us to have to do this would just be impossible, so it's probably something safer than having to hire up a manager.
When you start factoring in some of the extra costs, like having to run network scans,
Yeah.
through internal, my question, if you're a one-man IT shop, who are you gonna have do your internal scans?
Yeah,
Who do you have that's independent?
yeah,
I've got a guy that is not, he calls himself the Island of Misfit Toys, but he sits off by himself. He's in his own department. And one of the things he does, one of his main responsibilities is IT security. He runs network scans, one of the primary tools he uses is Nessus. He runs that against PCI with a more strict scope, but he runs against the entire network, so we can go in and see what are patch levels, what are our vulnerabilities, all that stuff, and he's not in, I'm broken down into admin computing, which is our ERP and ancillary systems, network or infrastructure services, which is network and network related services, and then PC support. He's not in any of those, so if we have an issue, it's independent.
yeah.
I'd advise you actually to bring in a consultant and get an estimate of the cost to do the PCI security if you took payments on your network and compare that to Square. For instance, we take payments on the network, so I have to pay for a third-party service, Alert Logic, that does all the network scans continuously and also does log monitoring on the servers. It's $25,000 a year. I doubt you're gonna pay $25,000 a year in Square fees.
No, good gosh, no. Really.
And that's what you have to do if you're swiping credit cards on your network.
It's making a business case.
Yeah, that sounds to me like.
It's not even your staff's time, just actual cost
Yeah, oh,
for
no, yeah.
PCI compliance is gonna exceed your Square funds.
Yeah,
Well, that's where you've got, other costs. I mean, depending, I don't know how yours is set up, but somehow that information you have to settle that at the end of the day.
right, right.
So there's some amount of money that comes back to your organization, and then somewhere there has to be a piece of something that tells it where to go. Whose money is this?
Yeah. it is.
And so then you're gonna have to have another merchant account or something set up so that you know that this is all library funds. And if you're only taking payments for late fees, then you could probably dump it into one budget account. But then if you're taking payments for other things, like, maybe you charge rent for rooms or something like that,
Yeah.
you have to be able to divvy that up, which makes it even more complicated, because even though you get this $500 back for what you sold yesterday, somebody's gotta figure out where to go.
Yeah.
So you can't we run into that all the time, people are like, oh, we wanna take payments for something, but you have to, and they don't think about the back end, but, there has to be some way to get it there. There's this interim piece where you have to know what it is you got.
Yeah. Yeah, right now, everything's separate, they might get up on the cash register, and it'd be.
Because there's a
next
back-end
morning-
system
yeah,
that knows where to send it.
Like the next morning, the business manager looks over the receipts and sees what went to what line item, and later she can say, well, what's this much money produced, this much money equals copies.
But when you get that back, you're just swiping a fee, you're just swiping
Yeah,
a
no,
card.
there's the same pie.
There's this amount of money that comes back from whoever cleared it, and you gotta know where to put it.
Yeah, yeah.
You also have to consider how do you handle voids and refunds.
Yeah. I've thought about that.
In our situation, we became the core just because software had the capability to do card swipes. So we're not talking about finance, but we're talking about building permits. Now we're talking about the museum. Now we're talking about payment kiosks. Okay, finance has got a role in payment kiosks, but there's so many entities and we're the common denominator, so it's always come back on us. I mean, we just form those relationships like we're talking about.
Hey, so the common denominator there, to me, is money.
So it goes back to finance.
It goes back to finance.
Okay.
I mean, to me, I don't know if it's CFO, business manager, whatever the title is, they should always be, at least if you're gonna form a PCI council or group, they should be the chair of it. They're the ones that, at the end of the day, they're the ones that have to stroke that check if there's a fine. So,
I guess that was my question to you. You don't report to finance, you report to,
correct. I report to a vice president of administrative services.
which is IT?
No, he is, our administrative services group handles facility services and maintenance, campus security, which is a sworn police force, human resources, construction management, and then I am over IT, inventory control, and courier services.
So, at the end of the day, there's a fine, and the head of your organization, the county says, who's accountable? Is it the CFO in your organization? And is that known? And is that directed, I guess where I'm struggling with?
Right.
I'm with the city. And really, this is the city manager's call to appoint somebody as the fall guy if something happens, so to speak. And then that guy has to put a committee together.
With the size of the fines that are probably gonna come through, you've got multiple people that are gonna be in a world of hurt.
$500,000 per card.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if, I've accepted the fact that if we have a PCI violation, even though I don't chair that group, I'm out the door too. I keep an empty box in my office for that very reason. So, it's one of those facts of life. It's, you know, the IT, it goes back to, and I really wish that wasn't recorded because I've got something else I would say. But it's a basis of security. Just like I know if a faculty member, somehow we've got it restricted, but if a faculty member of mine is able to get access to a class roster with a social security number on it, they print it out and leave it on their desk, and somebody picks that up, the faculty member's gone, but I am too. It came from my system. If it lives on my network, if it plugs in, if it's a blinky box, it's mine. So it's just one of those things that I've had to adapt to. So you're never going to absolve yourself of all responsibility of it.
Well, I'm not
you
saying
can
that.
try. Right,
I guess
but
what I'm saying is, you know, you mentioned several departments, HR,
Mhm.
you know, the audit department should be involved in this too. I mean, I guess I'm just wondering within your organization, if at the highest level, if he is involved, and he or she,
Yeah.
and they push down and is it clear who
right.
owns this?
Yeah, it's clear that it is a business process. It's owned by them. His is the name that I hope will be in the newspaper if something goes on. Okay. I've had my name in the paper for IT-related issues. It's not fun. So,
One of the things we're struggling with, Rick, is PCI in the cloud.
boo.
Yeah. Our network services folks, they want to send a virtual machines to do like cashiering stations. No. So, how do you guys deal with
We
PCI?
discussed a little bit about it, and we had the discussion before the session got going about wireless. I was lucky enough to roll into a situation where my predecessor and the previous network director were very security conscious, almost overly very conscious. So when I came in and started saying yes to some of this stuff, I had nowhere to go but up. With that, one of the things we decided when we rolled out wireless was to set up a completely separate physical infrastructure. So those lines don't cross. If it were me, and people would tell you I border on the side of paranoid when it comes to PCI and security, that type, I want a separate, at least virtual infrastructure. Yeah, I wouldn't want to run, like, we're a Cisco shop, so we're running UCS. I wouldn't want to have a UCS set up that is running my student portal, you know, academic servers, and oh, by the way, here goes a bookstore server that's got all of our PCI data for, you know, $4 million worth of transactions sitting beside this stuff. In theory, you know, they're separate machines. While I'm not technical now, I used to be able to go in and look at those files. I used to be able to see on this server that file A was sitting right next to file B. They're in the same damn directory. Somebody's gonna figure out a way to cross that line.
I have a security consultant tell me that, that if you have a machine in your cloud that's taking PCI data, then every machine in that cloud is subject to PCI scope.
Yes, I would agree with them.
So if you, like you said, if I want to stand up my own little tiny cloud to do just the PCI stuff, I'm okay. As long as it's completely separate hardware, completely and at that point, what are you gaining by doing a cloud? That's my argument.
High availability and redundancy. You know, it's the same type argument, but
Yeah.
is it? I have one. You know, we run a couple of smaller Dell servers for our bookstore for that very reason. It's virtualized,
Yeah.
but at the same, I would not stand up UCS to do that. My PCI environment is not that big.
I just wanted to comment on the setting up a PCI council.
Mm-hmm.
We did that for our city, but we called it the Red Flag Rules Committee and combined the PCI with the red flag rules so that they're being addressed at the same time.
And that's what ours is actually a data security council. More questions, comments, war stories?